River, talk to me. Tell me what you think about Harlem River. I'm in love, 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 love. Harlem River, talk to me. Where we headed now? Harlem River, I'm in love, 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 love. All because of you. In my pearl and my diamond shoes, I climbed a cloud, now I stole the moon. Harlem River, all because of you. Harlem River, swallow me. Put your hands around my neck. In Harlem River, I can't breathe. They've got the lights down now. In Harlem River, give me wings. Put my head up in the clouds. In Harlem River, all because oh, I'm nowhere now. Harlem River, tell me, is it true that in my pearl and my diamond shoes I've climbed a cloud, now I stole the moon? Harlem River, all because of you. Just where I'm going, 'cause I've never been. And I don't know just where I'm going or where I've been. Oh, Harlem River, like a diamond.
You Canadians are ever wondering what happens to your geese when autumn arrives and they all disappear? They're all down here.
Ride on that easy rider, flow like that Harlem River. Ride on that easy rattle, flow like that Harlem River. I ride for you, I ride for you, I ride for you, I ride for you.
Good morning, guys. It's 9 a.m. on Wednesday, October the 9th, 2019. Welcome to podcast number 35, which I have entitled Entering the Portal. And what this refers to is what is required to actually begin authentic training as an initiate who is seeking spiritual self-development in the Hermetic tradition. So today I'm going to talk a lot about what makes a good and bad student and what makes a good or bad teacher where beginning the process of training is concerned. And I'm going to introduce a bit of nomenclature which revolves around the subject of beginning authentic training, just so that we're all on the same page as far as the terminology being used is concerned. And it's a little bit windy here today, so I apologize if there's a bit of muffle on the microphone, because I lost my microphone baffle on the way down here this morning and I'm having to do with a makeshift version, so let's see how that goes. And for those of you who have been following my podcast up until this point, you might recognize that we're at the outfall at the Ahuriri Lagoon again in Napier today, and it's early spring. The blossoms on my nectarine tree have all bloomed and have just about disappeared. The temperatures are reasonably good in the morning now. We're up in the double digits in centigrade, and we're topping out at around the early 20s at the moment, sort of in the middle of the day, early afternoon at the moment, so we're well into spring for sure, which means more outdoor video locations coming up. It's been a bit rough over the last, especially about the last month. There's been so much wind I can't fly the drone, and on my days off, which are my weekends are actually in the middle of the week, there's been a lot of rain and everything. So today is really the first clear, fine, almost windless day we've had in several weeks. So taking advantage to get out here and make a video at one of my favourite locations. It's useful to watch the video I made previous to this one, if you haven't already, because it's a lead-in to the subject of this video, and it explains a couple of important points which are almost never understood by people who are seeking a proper education in Western Hermetism. So usually someone who is seeking training in Western Hermetism is known as, commonly, as an aspirant or a seeker, or more sort of technically as a zealator, someone who is zealously seeking knowledge and experience or training and education in Western Hermetism. In the school that I oversee, the Heredom College, we refer to people who are out there looking to get into training as aspirants or candidates. But more accurately, a candidate is somebody who has actually been accepted for serious consideration as a student, a candidate to initiatory training. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who want to become involved in initiatory training. And that training is designed to provide you with the tools you are required to have in your skill set as somebody who is moving towards the first major goal of initiatory training, spiritual self-development, and that is what we call knowledge and conversation with the higher genius. In other words, a interaction and intimate communication with your higher self, if you're more familiar with that term. The technical term that I use and that we use in the school that I oversee is the higher genius. In other words, the highest peak of your personal psychology. That once you get past that highest level, you're outside of yourself and into the collective. So we're looking at the concept this morning of aspirants, people who are seeking to get involved in serious training, and not everybody does. A lot of people want to take care of their whole education themselves, and that's often referred to as self-initiation. And I have vigorously made it very clear in the past that I do not believe that self-initiation is a viable option. It just simply doesn't work where authentic initiation in Hermetism is concerned. You can't initiate yourself because that's like performing brain surgery on yourself. It's physically an impossible task, because once you take an anesthetic and open your head and start mucking with your brain, that mere act interferes with your ability to carry out the surgery. Well, initiation is exactly the same. Once you delve into your mind and start manipulating your psyche in the way that initiation requires, that mere act actually stops you from being able to perform that task effectively and safely. So I don't believe in self-initiation. That's the first thing. A person who wants to get involved in authentic Hermetic initiation, which is the lead-in training to spiritual self-development, Western Hermetic spiritual self-development, requires a teacher, an expert, somebody who has at the very least achieved the first goal in initiatory training, and that is knowledge and conversation with his or her higher genius. And they have to have achieved that goal successfully, because it is possible to also achieve that goal without success, without being able to be productive about having achieved that goal. So the aspirant is ideally searching for an expert teacher. And in the Western Hermetic tradition, the technical name that is given to an expert teacher, either in magic or in alchemy, which are the two different paths that approach the summit of initiatory training. Everybody usually chooses one or other of those two paths, or they practice both of them in a mixture. They're seeking a teacher that's an expert in one or other or both of those two paths. And the technical term for such an expert is an adept, and that term used for an expert in Hermetism goes back a number of centuries. And of course, the definition of the term adept, no matter what else you want to think that that word means, is expert. They are somebody who is an expert in a number of things related to Hermetism, but where the subject that we're discussing today is concerned, he or she knows everything that is required to be known about the process of initiation, how to deliver that process to a novice, somebody who has just begun initiatory training is usually known as an apprentice or a novice, and that expert has to be able to successfully guide the novice through his or her training right up to the point of knowledge and conversation with his or her higher genius. And that's what defines an expert teacher. One of the very important facets of that expertise is that the teacher must have already gone through that process him or herself. You cannot teach a novice through the initiatory process if you have not successfully completed initiation yourself. And this isn't about whether or not you have read documents, collected intellectual information or whatever. It is about having had the experiences that go along with initiation. The intellectual side of it is easy. Anybody with an average level of intelligence can read the intellectual documents that are required as a basic guideline for initiation, but unless you've actually been through the process, experienced it for yourself, you'll never really understand what that process is or how to deliver it, because there are some things about those experiences which provide part of the education of initiation, which can only be learned through the experience, not through an intellectual grasp of an explanation of those experiences. So it is a form of gnosis, something that you understand intimately by having had intimate knowledge through experience of the process. So the process of initiation begins, authentic initiation begins with two individuals. An aspirant who is seeking a teacher and seeking an education, an initiatory education, and the aspirant is necessarily ignorant. He's seeking the education because he doesn't know what initiation really is or what it requires or how to carry it out. He is ignorant of the process of initiation. Initiation is an unknown quantity to him or her. So that's what defines the aspirant. The aspirant is seeking knowledge and understanding about the process of initiation and experience, but comes to the training ignorant. And this is an important concept, because experience from the point of view of an expert teacher will often demonstrate that many students think that they know enough about initiation to mess around with the process themselves and either do or not do things that they feel will improve upon the process, when they actually have no understanding of what the process is or what it requires. The student is ignorant. The teacher is exactly the opposite. The teacher has an intimate and in-depth knowledge an understanding of the initiatory process. And because of that, the initiatory relationship between the teacher and the student, the novice, is an autocratic relationship. In other words, it's not a democracy. The requirements of initiation are not up for negotiation or vote. The teacher provides the instruction and the student carries out that instruction, and that is the nature of the initiatory relationship. If the student decides not to carry out the instruction, or that he or she doesn't want to do certain things that are required by the process that the teacher provides as part of the instruction, that basically brings the process of initiatory education to a standstill. Because if something is required and the teacher is providing that instruction and the student is refusing to do it, either secretly or openly, then that's the end of the process. So when an aspirant is seeking an expert initiator, teacher, there is an attitude which is very common amongst people who are seeking that position, and that is that they're not sure how to tell whether the teacher is actually an expert or not, whether the teacher is a safe teacher or whether the teacher can actually provide an effective initiatory experience. And that is an understandable concern on the part of the student. That is, we all want an expert teacher, somebody who can actually deliver the process to us. But there are a number of problems with that requirement or need on the part of the novice, and the novice's ability to determine what makes a good teacher and what doesn't make a good teacher. The novice is, in fact, literally ignorant about the nature of the process of initiation, authentic initiation. It is unknown territory for him. So how is the initiate going to determine who an expert is and who isn't an expert? He simply doesn't have the required understanding to make that determination properly, which in the mind of the initiate puts him in a difficult situation. How can he tell who the good teachers are and who the bad teachers are? So there are a couple of very important concepts to understand about that assumed conundrum, and that is that, first of all, 30 years of experience teaching all manner of individuals, males and females, younger people and older people, intelligent people and stupid people, gifted people and average people. In almost every case, the last thing that the aspirant considers is whether or not he or she is actually in a position to be deserved of the best kind of expert teacher. Most aspirants just simply take it for granted. They decide that for some unknown reason, undefined reason, that they simply have the right to the best kind of teacher, the best kind of initiator. And the fact of the matter is, in 99% of cases, that isn't true, because most aspirants who become candidates and then novices for initiation simply will not complete successfully the basic training period of the initiatory experience. Most of them will drop out in the end because they don't have what is required, or they're not willing to put forward what is required, invest what is required in the initiatory process, so they fail and their training is over. In other words, they didn't from the first place deserve an expert teacher, the best quality teacher on the market. One of the other problems with this attitude about deserving the best education is that the best experts, the most competent teachers in authentic Hermetic training that is focused on personal spiritual self-development, are very rare individuals. Very rare individuals. If you ever are fortunate enough to find yourself in the presence of an actual authentic adept who can deliver effective initiatory training successfully, you yourself will be probably finding yourself in a rare experience, because such experts are far between and few, and because of that, often their hands are over full with the process of sorting through candidates in order to find students who are worthwhile. So this is the first issue, one that is almost never considered by the aspirant, and that is the question of what have you done to make yourself a viable student, somebody who's in the position of needing the best level of initiatory training from the best kind of teacher. What have you actually done to deserve that situation? And the answer with about 90% of people is that they've done nothing. Usually all they've done is read a lot of books. Sometimes they haven't even read a lot of books on all kinds of subjects, most of which they don't understand. And then some people have also toyed around with various exercises, so-called occult or esoteric or spiritual exercises, which are designed allegedly to help you develop yourself spiritually. And these two things together, reading and messing around with various spiritual exercises, together by themselves, at the most remedial level, do not define a properly prepared candidate to initiatory training. One of the other common properties which aspirants will explain to a potential teacher that they feel marks them as being a viable or valid candidate for initiation is that they've had some unusual psychic experiences as a child. And I can tell you for a start that the moment somebody starts explaining to you strange psychic experiences they had as a child, if you're an expert teacher yourself, one of the first things you'll recognize about these explanations is they're not unusual. They're actually very common. Probably about 50% or maybe even more of small children before the age of 7 or before the age of 12, have had very unusual kinds of unexplainable psychic experiences of one kind or another. Sometimes they're very joyful and interesting. A lot of times they're scary and unknown, and it's very common for people to believe, because most even children, but most adults never discuss these childhood experiences between themselves. There is an erroneous belief that they are therefore uncommon because you don't hear about them, and therefore that if you've had such an experience you're somehow special. Well, I can tell you now, they're not uncommon, they're actually very common, and it doesn't mean that you're special. All it means is that, like most small children, your mind is still extremely open to comings and goings between the unconscious and the conscious mind, let's put it that way. And so having psychic experiences as a child is very common. And it's not until around puberty that openness for most young people begins to shut down as they start taking on responsibilities in life and focusing on objective reality rather than on the fantasy or poetic imaginary world of the small child, which is nurturing of that psychic experience kind of psychological condition. So just because you think you're special because you've had psychic experience as a child, it's got nothing to do with anything, because I can tell you I have trained a lot of people who came into training making those kinds of claims, and they are just as likely as anybody else to bomb out very early in basic training because they have no idea what they're getting into, and they actually don't want initiatory training once they really understand what it means. So what makes a good student? Because aspirants are almost never asking the question whether or not they're deserving of proper training. What makes a good student? And most people will be surprised at the most necessary requirements for a good student, because they are very simple and common sense things. First of all, you have to be at least of average intelligence. In order to communicate effectively with a teacher, in order to understand that teacher's instruction and to be able to carry out the instruction the way it's intended to be carried out, you have to be a reasonably intelligent human being. And most people will take that for granted, but I can also tell you, after training hundreds of people, that most of the people who come to esoteric training are not intelligent. Most of them have no common sense and are relatively stupid, or they are actually clever people but they behave like they're stupid because they've learned that in order to get on in the average everyday world, it's not a good idea to advertise the fact that you're clever, so they've learned out of habit to behave stupid, and they keep doing it once they come into training, and often they won't stop once they realize that the initiatory relationship nurtures intelligence, and that you can't succeed in initiatory training if you keep behaving like an idiot. So that's one of the first things, is you have to have at least an average level of common sense intelligence in order to understand instruction and carry it out properly. The next thing is you have to be honest. The struggle for personal spiritual self-development is, at the end of the day, a struggle for the ultimate truth. At the end of the journey is what we call a state of illumination. What is illumination? Illumination is the truth about the nature, the actual truth about the nature of reality being revealed to you, so that you can understand effectively how to interact with reality in order not to cause yourself problems or have a bad experience, but in order to be most productive and most happy. In order to do that, you need to know the truth about reality, because as common everyday humans, we do not know the truth about reality. In fact, we believe all kinds of things about reality which are the opposite of the truth. So a dishonest person, somebody who believes that being dishonest or telling lies is a good life skill, can't succeed in initiatory training. You can't lie your way into illumination. You can't con or be dishonest upon the path toward the ultimate truth. You cannot grasp truth by being dishonest. So the next important thing that is required of a successful student is the ability to be honest with himself or herself, with the teacher, and as part of the training experience. You have to be honest and you have to be open. And this is important because I've had lots of students who think that they can just lie about the exercises and instructions that are given to them and the results that they get from those exercises, and they think they can lie about the way that they are dealing with the initiatory education, lies of omission or just straight out active lying about their relationship with the initiatory process. I've had lots of students like that, and they don't see any problem with being dishonest. They think they're making choices which will somehow make the initiatory process easier or more productive in some kind of a way, even though they have no idea what is required from the initiatory process anyway. So, average intelligence and honesty. The third thing is that the student has to be good at communication. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people choose in their own mind to try and self-initiate themselves, and it's often because they have dysfunctional social skills or they are poor communicators, and therefore they don't want to be involved with a teacher, where a big part of that relationship is that they need to be productive in the way that they communicate, both verbally and in a written manner. Because for example, in the training that the school that I oversee offers, it is necessary for students to write a lot of reports about the results of their experiences with the instruction that they're given, and those reports have to be accurate and detailed. If you have a poor literacy in English, then you're not going to be able to write productive reports or exchange productive emails with your teacher. If you have problems with the verbal communication of the English language, then you're not going to have a productive relationship with your teacher when it comes to discussing your training, describing your experiences, and talking about the difficulties and struggles that you're having. So a student must be, or willing to learn to be, a good communicator. And again, this may seem like basic common sense, but one of the major reasons why students in the basic training level of initiatory instruction fail that basic training is because they simply don't communicate. A lot of people just want to take the instruction from the teacher, sneak off into the corner, hide under a blanket and carry it out in their own time and in their own way. That is not how authentic training works. Authentic training is an interactive process between the teacher and the student. You can't just take the instruction and go off and deal with it yourself. That is an attempt at self-initiation, an attempt of you deciding what's productive and what isn't productive where instruction and the requirements of initiation are concerned. So you have to be a good communicator. Average intelligence, you have to be honest, and you have to be a good communicator. The fourth thing is you have to be reliable. You can't have a productive relationship with an initiator if your presence and your ability to deal with the requirements of initiation are unreliable. So the student has to be mature enough to attend to the requirements of his or her own training without being babysat by the teacher. The teacher shouldn't constantly have to be telling the student common sense things about how to deal with an education. The fifth requirement of a good student is that they have to have a basic background education in Western Hermetism. That means they have to be well read. And well read means reading books which are often expensive and difficult to get hold of. Books which are cheap and easy to get hold of do not, most of the time, provide accurate information about Western Hermetism. We've got to be aware of the fact that there are two kinds of esoteric education in the Western Hermetic tradition. One kind is the mainstream or popular level, which is comprised of 90% of people who are interested in studying this subject, and the other kind is what I call the underground or authentic stream, which is populated by about 10% or less of people who are interested in studying this subject, which means that most of the information out there that you can get access to about Western Hermetism is not productive. And when it is productive, it is usually only productive or accurate in a very superficial kind of a way. So the fifth thing is that an aspirant, in order to make himself or herself a good candidate for initiatory training, needs a good in-depth background education in Western Hermetism. And that means reading broadly, reading about magic, right down to the very depths of the magical tradition. Reading accurate information about alchemy and what it actually is, what alchemists, students of alchemy, what they study, what they are involved in, what they are looking for and seeking. Reading books on initiation, reading books on esoteric organizations, fraternities, orders, societies that have formed for the purpose of educating people in Hermetism, and learning all about what belonging to those kinds of groups involves, what it requires. And then ultimately, for background education, having been involved in a respectable mainstream level esoteric fraternity or organization that offers education, something like Builders of the Adytum, Fraternity of the Inner Light, Servants of the Light, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. There are groups within that genre that are respectable, but there are also some which are a waste of time being involved in. Freemasonry, and of course there is a version of Freemasonry that women can join as well, co-masonry. Men and women can join co-masonry, and it's very similar to authentic male orientated Freemasonry, traditional or regular Freemasonry. Being involved in those kinds of groups is about the best background education that you can get, leading into an authentic initiatory training. And that's because inside these groups you'll meet all kinds of people who are studying all kinds of things, and that you can talk with, converse with, interact with, and learn about their views, their experiences. A lot of those people will have been involved in many different kinds of groups, and they can tell you what those groups are like, their opinions about them, the kinds of things they teach and the way they teach them. And that's probably the best, broadest education that you're going to get to set you up for becoming a viable candidate for authentic training.
Harlem River, talk to me. Tell me what you think about Harlem River. I'm in love, 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 love. Harlem River, talk to me. Where we headed now? Harlem River, I'm in love, 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 love. All because of you. In my pearl and my diamond shoes, I've climbed a cloud, now I've stole the moon. Harlem River, all because of you. Swallow me. Put your hands around my neck. In Harlem River I can't breathe. They've got the lights down now.
That's better. So why is it important to have this good background education? First of all, we have to remember that this background education is not going to be, for the most part, about the details of authentic training, because the knowledge of the details of authentic training are mostly still secret. They are things that are only really known and understood by expert teachers and by students who have, to some degree, entered into that training. So any good background training, that education or study that you're going to do yourself, is largely going to be about the popular or mainstream tradition. There are ideas amongst all of that which are useful to authentic training, but aspirants are not in a position to be figuring out which parts of the popular tradition are useful in authentic training or not. Therefore, it is important to have as broad of an education in the background of Hermetic philosophy, Hermetic tradition, Hermetic education, in magic and in alchemy as you can possibly manage. So why? There are two important reasons for this. And the first one is that from the teacher's point of view, if you have a good full background education in Hermetism, it's going to help grease the wheels of industry as far as your initiatory training goes. In other words, when your teacher's trying to have a constructive conversation with you about your training and about aspects of the training generally, if you already have a good grasp of the kind of language that's used in Hermetism, a good grasp of basic concepts of magic and alchemy and Kabbalah and ritual, the kinds of words, technical terms that are used in discussing these subjects, then this is going to make the teacher's job a lot easier, and it's going to make your progress move a lot quicker. If your teacher has to stop and educate you in everything from scratch, it's going to take literally years before you begin getting instruction in the actual core of initiatory training, because your teacher's going to have to give you what you should have been doing anyway as an eager, enthusiastic aspirant, and educate you in all the basics. So get a good basic education so that it helps grease the wheels of industry when you find yourself involved in authentic training. The second reason for doing that, for getting that good background education, is that it is absolutely stupid to get yourself involved in initiatory training, authentic training, training with an authentic teacher, with an expert, if you don't really understand what it is that you've got yourself involved in. And you really can only get that understanding if you have done a thorough background study of the Hermetic tradition and the kinds of things that Hermetic occultists are seeking to achieve. You need to understand what initiation is, what spiritual self-development is, what knowledge and conversation with the higher genius is, what attaining illumination is, the kinds of things that will require of a candidate. You need to understand the kinds of things that are missing from the popular level of Hermetic initiation, the popular level. You need to understand the kind of ideas that are not being discussed in the popular level of Hermetic study. You need to also have your head wrapped around the kinds of ideas that are associated with serious, authentic training, and what authors who seem to have had some kind of access to that training or an understanding of it are saying about that training. Because it is absolutely important that before you start hunting down a teacher and imposing yourself on his private time, that you have some kind of viable idea about what it is that you're getting into. And again, this might seem like common sense, but the reality is a large number of the people who I have had to train in the past have discovered very early on during basic training, after insisting that they have a good thorough background in self-study and that they understand what they're getting into, very early on during basic training, they suddenly discover not only is authentic Hermetic initiation training that is designed to push you towards spiritual self-development, they discover that they actually don't want it, that it's not what they expected, that they want something else, and therefore that they don't want authentic training. And this causes all kinds of problems, because usually the student, after being told that they really shouldn't be beginning training without a thorough background self-study first, and them insisting that they have done that, then they feel embarrassed or shameful, or they get very uncomfortable about actually having to admit that they know virtually nothing about what it is that they're asking for. And so students in that position, the last thing that they're going to do is be straightforward and honest with the teacher and say, hey, this is too heavy for me. This is not at all what I expected it to be. I'm not willing to invest time and effort in this. I've got other things that are more important to me. Therefore, it would be a good idea if we stop right here. I have never met a student who was in a position of actually not wanting the training, offering voluntarily to give up the training, to stop it. Instead, what usually happens is it gets to the point where the teacher is so frustrated with the student's lack of attention, lack of reliability, poor communication, all of which things usually come about because they have become disinterested in the process, that it's the teacher in the end who has to say to the student, that's enough. There is a serious big problem when it gets to the point that it's the teacher who has to end the training because the student isn't respecting the process enough to do the work properly, meet deadlines, be reliable, maintain a productive level of honesty, communicating effectively. All these things slowly start to break down, usually when the student begins to be concerned that he actually doesn't want what's being offered. But instead of volunteering to step down, the teacher has to expel the student from training. And if it gets to that point, then there's a serious problem going on, because it means, first of all, that the novice is not a mature human being, let alone a mature initiate. And it also shows that the individual should never have been in training in the first place if it has to get to the point where the teacher, after a lot of warning and caution, has to then turn around and say, you're still not behaving, this has got to stop here. A lot of that can be avoided by simply educating yourself properly, thoroughly, about what magic really is in the Western tradition, what alchemy really is in the Western tradition, what esoteric fraternities really are, what they do, and the history of the entire subject. History is of the utmost importance when studying Hermetism, because the state of the Hermetic tradition today, what's being offered to aspirants as far as training, is the present result of several thousand years of development of Hermetic philosophy and Hermetic practice. So studying the history, if nothing else, is of the utmost importance. So that was the fifth thing, to give yourself a thorough background education so that you can smooth the wheels of industry with your teacher, and so that when you start looking for a teacher and applying for an education, you know what it is that you're getting yourself involved in. Because actual authentic Hermetic training is hard work. It requires a lot of mental and emotional hard work. It requires a lot of dedication, and it requires patience and persistence over a good period of time. So I've talked mainly about the issues revolving around students, aspirants, people who want training, and the requirements of those people if they are going to get themselves in a position where they are being offered or have the ability to apply for authentic training. Don't screw it up. When you apply for authentic training, when you find yourself in a position to apply for authentic training, don't screw it up, because I can almost guarantee you, if you do screw it up, especially early on, you're not going to get another chance. And even if you do get a second chance, the chances are, because you didn't prepare properly in the first place anyway, you're not going to do what's required between being expelled and being accepted back for a second chance. You're just going to sit around and wait for a second chance like somehow you deserve it. That's how it happens. Every time in the past when I have broken my rule of no second chances and given a second chance to someone, they have made an outrageously worse approach to training than they did the first time that they got expelled for. They screw it up worse the second time around. So before you get yourself into a position of being able to ask for training, when you're in a position to ask for it, make sure that you're ready by giving yourself a thorough grounding in the history and the details of what Hermetism is, what initiation is, and how training is delivered in the Hermetic tradition. So amid all this concern about the teacher, whether the teacher is good enough or not, whether he's actually capable of delivering effective initiatory training, the first thing that the aspirant needs to know about the teacher is, has that teacher actually gone through the entire process that he alleges to be teaching and completed that process successfully? Now, unfortunately, the student, the aspirant, is in no position to calculate or to understand what successful completion of training is. But it is helpful to know whether or not your student, your teacher, has completed that training. If a teacher is an actual expert and does have the authority to pass on real initiatory training focused on personal spiritual self-development, then somebody gave that teacher the knowledge and experience to be in that position of authority. Because if the teacher does not have a pedigree, in other words, there was no teacher's teacher, then the teacher is self-initiated. And I can tell you right now, if you don't want heartbreak in a training situation and don't want to be led down a path of deceit or disappointment, never accept training from anybody who either outright says they were self-initiated or describes the conditions of their own initiation in such a way that leads you to believe, okay, this person didn't actually have a teacher, they're self-initiated. Avoid that. Any authentic expert has a pedigree. They had a teacher and their teacher had a teacher, and it is important to understand what the background of that pedigree is. Some authentic teachers may not like to discuss that pedigree, but in my opinion, if they don't, then they are expecting you to accept what they are offering in the way of training completely on their say-so. And there is a certain degree of viability in that kind of approach, but in my opinion, one of the only forms of authority for an expert teacher to stand on is to give some kind of believable and viable explanation about one's pedigree, because then that allows the aspirant to do a bit of research for themselves and to at least have a go at coming up with a conclusion on their own about whether the system that's being taught and then whether the teacher that's offering to deliver that training is in some way a viable option. So pedigree, where a teacher is concerned. The other thing is that exactly how the training is being delivered by the teacher is largely a matter of personal preference. There are all kinds of different ways of delivering effective initiatory training, and not all of them require that you are physically present in front of the teacher to deliver that training, to receive that training. Spiritual self-development is not a physical process, and that should be common sense. If you feel that you need to physically be in front of somebody in order to have a spiritual experience, then you're looking at the process wrong. Spiritual self-development is a psychological process. It is about what the teacher teaches you in the way of altering your psychology, altering your mind, in order to allow the spiritual part of yourself to emerge into your conscious awareness. That does not require physical proximity. It doesn't require physical objects in order to carry that out, although there are authentic forms of training that involve physical acts and physical objects, such as magical ritual and laboratory alchemy. They both have physical aspects that help catalyze initiatory training, but those kinds of things are not necessarily required. So exactly how a teacher delivers training really depends on the teacher, and because his method is something that you're not familiar with does not mean that it is not effective. His method is also not the kind of thing that you would generally attribute to the tradition that he stems from, does not necessarily mean that he's not an authentic part of that tradition. An expert, an adept initiator should be able to design, implement and execute a process of initiatory training completely novel to any other previous process that he's familiar with or that you might be familiar with as an aspirant. That's one of the things about a teacher, and that is that once you've had knowledge and conversation with the higher genius, you have the skill to create unique situations. The next thing about the teacher is it is absolutely important that the teacher has successfully completed training up into knowledge and conversation with the higher genius. And I'll talk more about exactly what that first goal of initiatory training is in a later podcast. But let's just say for present that knowledge and conversation with the higher genius is arguably understood in modern times to be the goal of all Western Hermetic initiatory training. Whatever path you're choosing, whatever techniques are being used during your training, the first important goal of that training should be knowledge and conversation with the higher genius, no matter what words the teacher uses to describe that situation. In other words, giving you clear, clean, accurate access to your higher self, your higher functions. So it's absolutely important that the teacher has completed the initiatory process themselves. In other words, has successfully achieved knowledge and conversation with the higher genius. The reason for this is that the requirements of delivering an effective initiation to a novice are such that the lower functions of the mind are not capable of understanding the process or of calculating what is required on a blow-by-blow basis. When a teacher has a student and they're moving their way through the training, the kind of things that come up during the training that the teacher has to consider and come up with solutions for are the kinds of things that are beyond the lower functions of the mind to figure out in most cases. The only way that a teacher can effectively figure out most of the problems of which arise in initiation is first of all to be able to recall their own training and remember what happened with them in similar situations, or the kinds of things that were taught to them about how to deal with unique problems. And the other part of the process is that because the lower functions are not capable of calculating the process of initiation or understanding it properly, it means that the teacher needs access to the higher functions and to the higher genius in order to be able to see training in the way that it needs to be seen, and in order to come up with solutions to unique problems that any individual student is going to present to training. A teacher that does not have this ability to access the higher genius, to see the training process itself through the eyes of the higher genius, is not an expert and is not an adept, and therefore should not be trusted to complete the process effectively as a teacher. Ultimately, we must remember that the whole point in initiation driving us towards knowledge and conversation with the higher genius is we want that knowledge and that conversation because the Hermetic tradition recognizes that the higher genius not only knows everything there is to know about us, but that the higher genius also controls everything about our lives. And therefore, it's common sense that if we can talk to the higher genius and know what the higher genius is all about, that it has these skills, then it is the best place to go for instruction to ourselves about what our best approach, most productive approach to living a life is. The whole process of initiation is aimed at that goal of getting access to the higher genius in order for us to learn what is best for us, what is most productive. Because the higher genius knows everything about us and it also controls everything about our reality. If we accept this basic premise, then it's easy to understand how the student-teacher relationship even comes about in the first place. Teachers shoulder an enormous amount of burden where selecting new students are concerned, because the human race is at such a stage at present where most people are simply not ready for effective training. If you're not preparing yourself properly to be recognized by an authentic teacher, you won't be accepted as a candidate. It's that simple. So I think I've probably gone a bit overboard with the discussion today, but I know it's an important thing to be talking about, because most people in the esoteric community are looking for training, even if they don't admit it. There's something that they're lacking in their understanding, and they're wanting somebody to teach it, even if they think they're educating themselves or being self-initiated. The truth of the matter is, the real secrets of Hermetism are passed on by experts to non-experts. And so most people are looking for an education or a teacher, which makes this particular podcast important, and this whole subject of entering into training an important one. What's required to be accepted by an authentic teacher? If eventually you actually do find one, what are you going to do when you find that person? What are they going to do about you? How are they going to see you? What position are they in to make a judgment about your condition as a seeker, as somebody who's looking for knowledge? Are you trustworthy? Are you reliable? Are you honest? Can you communicate properly? Do you have an effective and thorough background education in the Hermetic tradition? Do you know what it is that you're trying to get yourself into? And what are you looking for? Are you looking for knowledge and conversation with the higher genius and eventually full illumination? Or are you just looking to master magic or master alchemy for whatever reason, outside of any concern for your own personal spiritual development? All of these things need to be thought about and considered properly before you find yourself in a position to be looked over by somebody who is actually an expert and who is in a actual literal position to make a judgment about you as a candidate for training. So the next podcast, I'm going to touch upon the subject of basic training, of what I call basic training. And the school that I oversee use the process of basic training to basically vet candidates for full advanced training. It gives the candidate a taste of what training, full advanced training, is like, so that they can make a decision about whether or not they want to continue. So next podcast, we're going to be talking about basic training, about the kind of techniques that a teacher who works a system similar to the one that I teach, what actually happens in that basic training and how it affects the student and the position that the teacher is in delivering that basic training. If you've made it to this point in the morning, it's now 11 o'clock. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in the next podcast.
1, 2, 3, 4. Harlem River, talk to me. Tell me what you think about Harlem River. I'm in love, 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 love.